interesting to me that Advent is a time that's so filled with hope and waiting and preparation. And we always start this first Sunday with something that's very apocalyptic. And part of that is because it is traditional, the first Sunday of Advent, to talk about the second coming of Christ and to talk about that in traditional ways that are so filled with these incredible images. And, this kind of thinking about the apocalypse is very much in the water right now in evangelical Christianity, particularly. You can go on Trinity Broadcasting Network or any number of the Christian broadcasting networks and see ministers. Reverend John Hagee is one that comes to mind, who's always well attired in a $2,000 suit and has many charts behind him and has built his whole ministry on trying to interpret what's happening apocalyptically in the present moment. And this kind of, as it sits in our water, started in the 1970s with a little paperback that many of you may have owned called The Late Great Planet Earth, where it was kind of this idea that we're living in apocalyptic times was introduced into popular culture. And then another set of books came along, written by the kind of the same folks, I think, called the Left Behind series. And in these stories, which are incidentally filed under fiction, but have a lot of apocalyptic imagery and story and evangelical apocalyptic theology in them, they also became very popular. And I think it was, what was his name? Kirk Cameron was starred in a couple of movies that made movies of the Left Behind books. And with the kind of things that are going on here, it is very Hollywood worthy, honestly. But I want us to pull back from all of that this morning because I think we need to think about apocalypse in a different way. And instead of all this drama, and I'll be the first to admit to you right now, the world feels apocalyptic. There's a lot of stuff going on that feels intense and violent and challenging. And it's hard for us to get our heads around. The happenings in the Middle East, the conflict between Israel and Hamas right now is these are pieces of current events that people like John Hagee try to apply biblical imagery to and to say, oh, this is happening and it means that the apocalypse is coming and Jesus is returning and we're all going to be raptured out of here, which has always seemed to me a little bit like not wanting to stay behind and clean up the mess we've made. And so as we enter into this conversation this morning about all things apocalyptic, I want us to go back to this quote by Adrienne Marie Brown, who says that things are not getting worse, they are getting uncovered. Now, you could also insert the word reveal here. And this word revealed, or as it shows up in Aramaic in the first scripture we have in the book of Daniel. gala, to reveal, or to unveil, or to uncover. Now this is where this word will become this idea of revealing, of apocalyptic revealing, will get translated in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, the first one, as apocalypsis, which starts to sound like apocalypse. And it is also the word that is applied to the name of the last book of our New Testament, which is the book of Revelation, which almost didn't make it into the canon because it was so weird. There was a lot of debate about that. You should know also, as we back up to the book of Daniel today, which shows us the Jewish version of apocalypse, which apocalypse was in the water, and it shows up in Judaism, it shows up in Christianity, it shows up in Gnostic Christianity. It's just in the water, and it shows up in different ways and goes in different directions. And so if you thought, as Steve was reading all that stuff in that second passage of the book of Daniel, that it sounds a lot like the book of Revelation, you would be absolutely correct. Because this second part of Daniel is very apocalyptic. And everybody's having all these dreams. All through Daniel, the kings are having dreams. Daniel is having dreams. And so I want to go back and look at this. And I want you to keep in mind, this is kind of the Jewish version of the book of Revelation, what we're looking at today. And probably one of the most important things about it for us is that in the lectionary scripture, which is in the New Testament, Jesus references the book of Daniel. And that's why I chose it this morning, because he talks about something in Mark 13 and also in Matthew 24 and 25 that he calls the abomination of desolation, or the desolating sacrilege. And that is something that is referenced 3 times in the book of Daniel. And we're going to talk about that more in a minute. So Jesus did this too. Jesus read the scriptures of his tradition. Do you hear that? He was familiar with them. And so I want to look at this because Jesus was referencing the destruction of the temple. When in Mark 13, the disciples come out of the temple and they're saying, "Oh, what beautiful stones, and it's such a beautiful place." And Jesus says, all these stones are going to be dismantled. That's a paraphrase of what he says, but he says they're all going to be tossed down one upon the other. And that's because the Romans are going to come and dismantle the whole thing. And there have been several, this idea of desolating sacrilege, there have been several sort of violations of the sanctity of the temple. And the one Daniel is referring to was when there was a ruler over the area. His name was Antiochus Epiphanes. He was one of Alexander the Great's generals. And Epiphanes also means like in the image of God, which tells you something about Antiochus, however you say his name. But he desecrated the inner parts of the temple by setting up an altar to Zeus. So you can imagine how this was felt about among the Jewish people. There were also stories of the soldiers defecating in the temple and that sort of thing. So when Daniel is referring to the desolating sacrilege, or the abomination of desolation, he's talking about the setting up of this idol to Zeus and the destruction of the inner sanctum of the temple, which would have been a terrible, terrible thing to Jews. When Jesus references it in today's lectionary reading, he's talking also about the destruction of the temple. And this is at a very different time, but it's going to be a Roman destruction. And would the Romans did things like go set up their military standards, like their flags in the temple, and they did various things to desecrate it as well. So this term, abomination of desolation or desolating sacrilege, is applied, historically to that. And we've talked about in Bible study how these folks had to speak in code, because if they spoke out too much about the rulers, they would end up in all kinds of hurt. And that's why you end up in apocalyptic literature with these stories about horns and animals and all that. I hope you notice, some of you who are into art, that those 4 beasts in the book of Daniel are the 4 beasts that show up in a lot of stained glass windows throughout history. They become applied to the 4 gospel writers in a whole different way. So there's a whole history behind that as well this morning. I want to look at it's interesting because in the first scripture, that in Daniel 2, King Nebuchadnezzar, who's a Babylonian king, he loves Daniel. And Daniel also, and his son Belshazzar also loves Daniel. And so Daniel gets along really well. We talked about this 2 Sundays ago with the Babylonian rulers. And so Daniel had interpreted this dream for Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar was so relieved that he gave Daniel all these gifts and awards. The word here says that he worshiped him. And he gives him sort of a title that I want you to notice. The king said to Daniel, and he says this first about God, and then he says later it's about Daniel as well. Truly, your God is God of gods and Lord of kings, and a revealer, Gela, of mysteries. For you have been able to reveal this mystery. So he gives Daniel this title of Gela, or revealer. And he also talks about how God is a revealer of mysteries. And it says that because he's a revealer of mysteries, the king promoted Daniel. He gave him many gifts. And then he also promoted his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So it was good for Daniel's friends too. I want to talk for a minute about this idea of being a revealer, because I'm not going to make you go through that second passage again, but if you take one thing from that, it is that being a revealer is really hard work. Being a revealer and having all these dreams and receiving all this information, in the Christian tradition, we call these people mystics. Now, people like Teresa of Avila, who had all these different visions of things. People like Hildegard of Bingen and Meister Eckhart, who had visions of things and wrote things down and tried to interpret and understand the mysteries of God, so they could then reveal them to the rest of us, to the world, as best as they could. And I think sometimes it's easy for us to think, oh, they just got the information and they revealed it, or the prophets, God dictated it down and they wrote it down and then they read it or something. Being a revealer, being a mystic, being a prophet, having this kind of energy come in is hard work. And Daniel apparently gets a lot of this information while he's sleeping, which you guys know how it is when you're not able to sleep, or when your sleep is disturbed. It's upsetting. It messes you up in your waking hours. And then if you've had a bad dream or something the night before, you go to bed the next night and you're laying there thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to have a bad dream again. So then you can't sleep again. So I want you to think about this kind of how hard this task. I mean, yeah, Daniel gets lifted up. He gets lifted up and gets this title of revealer, and he's very well thought of, enough to kick up some serious jealousy with some of the other people, which or some of the other leaders, which we heard about a couple weeks ago, which landed him in the lion's den. But this thing of being a revealer is hard work. And I I want to just I'm gonna read Adrienne Marie Brown again to us, because I think this is where we are called to participate in this work of revealing. She says that things are not getting worse, they are getting uncovered. We must hold each other tight and to continue to pull back the veil. So in this, I guess my question for us today is how do we best navigate, read our maps and compasses, how do we best navigate when there's all this apocalyptic energy around us? The world looks very apocalyptic right now. So do we buy into the sort of the evangelical idea, Jesus is coming back right now, soon, and he's gonna kick everybody's butt that I don't like, or I think they're off base, or I think they're sinners, and I'm gonna sit up in the grandstands of heaven and watch. Now that's essentially what this theology says. Does that sound like anything you know Jesus to be? No, it does not. So I I want us to back up and find a healthier way to enter into this conversation about apocalypse or about revealing. Because I think Jesus is revealing himself to us in each and every present moment. He gives us a clue about this with his title, Emmanuel, God with us. God with us in the present moment. So I think it's important that we not be looking for a second coming out here that's going to allow us all to be raptured out of here and get out of the mess we've made. It's more about being present and looking for Jesus in the present moment as he, she, they come to us again and again and again. So, where's Jesus showing up for you on this Hope Sunday? Is another way of thinking about this. Where is Jesus' presence being revealed to you? And how do we navigate and stay focused there when everything is so chaotic and apocalyptic in the world around us? When every time in history things get chaotic, this kind of apocalyptic thinking gets picked up and gets popularized again. So what do we do? I encourage all of us to be on the lookout for where Jesus is showing up for us in the present moment, where Jesus is revealing himself, and where we are called to be Gela or revealers like Daniel was in the present moment. How are we called to do that? One of the way I love all the readings this morning, all these hand images keep showing up. Adrienne Marie Brown says we got to grab each other tight, hands, grab each other tight, and hang on as we pull back the veil. Jan Richardson talks about the lines in our hands and how we can put them together to read the map. How are we called to do that on this Hope Sunday when everything seems so apocalyptic?